All right, Damon Larsen.
Hello.
Hi, thank you very much for making time for me today.
Yeah, my pleasure.
I appreciate it, especially because of the little bit of a slow start there. Completely my bad. Wrong end of Hastings Street.
Normally I'm the one who's 10 to 15 minutes late for all my meetings, so I don't mind when someone else is.
All right, well, I'm glad I could put it on the other foot for once. So I want to talk to you primarily today about the Medicinal Mushroom Dispensary, which looks amazing. Really interested to hear more about that. But I guess just to kind of set a foundation, I mean, you've had a pretty varied career. I think I could call you an author, an activist, a politician, an entrepreneur. Is there any one of those areas where you feel the most affinity to?
I guess activist is what I would call myself if there was one thing. And what I've liked about my 30-year career in the marijuana legalization movement and the drug policy reform movement for me has been that I've been able to do all kinds of different stuff, all sort of circling around this main central issue that I'm trying to attack maybe in different ways. And so like starting my businesses, talk about being an entrepreneur, but all my businesses have been in the area of civil disobedience, trying to make a profit as a business must, but doing that in a way that is also violating the law in a way that helps people get access to whatever it is, whether it was the seed bank, even the Cannabis Culture magazine we used to do when that information was forbidden, and then more recently my Cannabis dispensary, and now the Mushroom Dispensary is providing people products they need. Because that's what prohibition is about, is trying to stop us accessing these things, so making it available in that way. So that's what I've liked about that, all my stuff. I wish I was better known as an author. I'd like to write more books. I've written a few, but I'd like to get more written stuff out there. But
what's one book you recommend that you've written to the audience, to myself as well? What would be the first book you recommend to read?
Well, I like Harry Pothead and the Marijuana Stone is my favorite one so far. But the one that sells the best is our Green Buds and Hash, which is like a Dr. Seuss parody. And my cannabis history book, I also quite proud of, and I'm working on an extended edition, a longer version of that. So those are my top 3 books.
Amazing. So is that the Harry Potter one? Is that like a parody? Is it a fantasy book?
Basically, you basically take out all the magic from Harry Potter and replace it with the magic of cannabis. And it's Harry Pothead. He goes to the Hempward School of Herbcraft and Weedery, where Professor Doing the Dope and Professor Vacuous Vape and the others. It's in the Cannabis Castle, and there's an evil cop that's trying to get him. And it's a fun story. If you like Harry Potter, there's definitely aspects in there that will appeal to you, but you don't have to be familiar with Harry Potter to enjoy the story of Harry Pothead.
I love Harry Potter and I love weed, so I think like there's pretty much zero chance I'm not going to enjoy that book.
I'll send you home with a copy. I got a lot of them here.
Oh, amazing! Okay, that's awesome. So where did this all start for you? Was there something that ignited this passionate activism in you?
It's funny, I mean, I started smoking cannabis like between grade 11 and grade 12, and that was definitely sort of an eye-opening thing for me. I read a book called The Emperor Wears No Clothes by Jack Herrera. It's kind of an old school one now, but it was a major launching point for many activists. That book really had a lot of great information about the hidden history of cannabis and hemp, mostly in the U.S., but also around the world. And I was always interested in politics as a kid, so I started writing letters to my members of parliament asking about marijuana and drug policy, and sometimes they would answer, and I kept a binder with all their answers in it. But it's funny, because as a kid, I wasn't really into like drugs or that kind of stuff, but I found this project that I did when I was in grade 5. We had to pick 3 world resources and show their movement on a map and do a little thing about where they came from. And I did coca, opium, and cannabis. And I had this little map with coca from Colombia going up to Canada. Just a little thing, and I thought, that's weird. That's a real indication of a future path that I don't think at the time I was thinking I'm going to be a drug policy activist when I was 11 years old or anything. But to me, it's just one of the most important issues in the world right now. I've had a very positive life and childhood in that, and I really just want to give back to society, and it seems like something that it's been fun being an activist. I've really had a lot of cool adventures during these last 30 years in this path, and I also get to feel like I'm helping people on an individual level in terms of through our dispensaries, providing this beneficial healing medicinal products to people that couldn't otherwise get it, and also maybe in a more broader societal way that we played a role in getting to the legalization of cannabis, even though there's a lot of problems with legalization as we've got it. I think we are making progress in terms of making these big societal changes through our activism. So I feel good about my work for the last 30 years, and I figure we got many more decades ahead on this path.
Brilliant. Okay, so let's touch on this for a little while then, because from my perspective, coming over from the UK, to be able to walk into a store, buy some cannabis, and consume that cannabis, I still feel like a little naughty kid. Like, I'm like, is this real? Can I do this? And it's amazing. I think it's like a huge step forward. But I've probably got my opinions on goods and bads, but I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on the legalization piece. Is it a good, bad thing? Has it been done well?
It's a mix of both. I mean, it hasn't been done well in the sense that the cannabis movement was about liberating cannabis, ending the stigma on cannabis, freeing our culture, and really letting us continue doing what we're already doing, which is growing, selling, and providing cannabis, but within a legal framework. But instead, we've got a legalization that is extremely restrictive, very punitive, still maintains a lot of the ideology of prohibition, and seems more about replacing the current cannabis structure and movement with a new one, which is really often run by the police, and the prohibitionist politicians are the major shareholders and stakeholders and boards of directors of these new companies, and these are the people who spent their lives demonizing, attacking, and often passing the very laws that caused a great deal of harm and misery among the cannabis community. One of our former prime ministers, Brian Mulroney, was a conservative prime minister in the 80s. He really embraced the war on drugs around the same time as Reagan, and they were very close. And he passed laws that prohibited High Times magazine and Cheech and Chong movies and other cannabis and grow books were all forbidden in Canada until we were defeated those laws in court in the 90s. And he's on the board of directors of a cannabis company and selling cannabis to people. And it's one thing if you say, hey, I was wrong about that, I've learned my lesson, and now I'm going to donate and try to make it right in some way, then yeah, of course, I respect that if you change your mind. But these guys have not changed their minds. They don't apologize for the harm they did, and so it's bothered us that they're in charge. What's good about legalization in Canada, which you don't notice so much in a city like Vancouver, where possession arrests already were near zero, but in most of Canada and smaller communities, people were getting arrested and charged for cannabis possession all the time. And that has dropped. It hasn't dropped to zero, but it's dropped to, I think, under 1,000 people last year is what the number looks like. And because you can still get charged for possession of illicit cannabis. So the cannabis that I have, if you didn't buy it in a legal shop, that's still illegal and you can still get charged for it. But in practical terms, it doesn't really happen very much. That shouldn't be criminalized, but going from 60,000 people a year, or 60,000 in Canada, being arrested for possession down to under 1,000, that's a dramatic difference in people's lives. That's huge. But in Vancouver, we don't notice that because that wasn't happening here anyways. So that's the good thing about it, is a big standing down. But the bad thing is that in terms of who's selling it, who's profiting from it, and the way it's being dealt with, it's still, that part's not really fair, and there's still a lot of problems. And I think that's why the legal cannabis is highly taxed. It has to be all in child-proof containers, which means there's all this plastic packaging. We don't sell tobacco in child-proof containers, and a raw bud is not harmful to a child. I can see edibles maybe being in child-proof because that could be appealing to a kid or something, but even pre-rolled joints, like if you can light the lighter, you can get the child-proof thing open. So, but there's issues around the taxation. There's issues that they didn't license enough growers, so there's kind of a cannabis shortage. And there's definitely, if you go on Twitter and look at some people's posts, there's moldy buds. One person bought a pre-rolled joint, and then they couldn't get it lit, and then when they examined it, it turned out to be a pencil wrapped in rolling paper. That was in the news a while ago, and that should not be happening. And there was another guy trying to buy cannabis, and it turned out in the container was nuts and bolts, like metal pieces, and no marijuana. So there's issues still to be worked out in terms of quality control, right? And but these things will get better over time, I think, but there's still a lot of people being criminalized under legalization. You can grow four plants per household, which is great, better than zero, absolutely. It's still an arbitrary low number, but way better than zero. But then two provinces, Quebec and Manitoba, said we're not going to let you grow in our province, and there's a court case in Quebec right now challenging that. And in BC, our NDP government said, well, you can grow those 4 plants, but if anybody can see them from the street, you can be arrested and potentially go to jail. So seeing your cannabis plant, if it's growing on a balcony or poking over a fence, or you just want to grow it in your front yard, and someone can see it, you can be charged and get 3 months in jail and a $5,000 fine. And that's unparalleled in terms of anything else like that. There's nothing else like that. So there's still a lot of problems, some at the federal level, some at the provincial level, but I do think things are only going to get better from now on, and that we've kind of established a baseline now under legalization. And I think that it used to be things would get better and worse over the decades. I think things are only going to improve in Canada now, but we still have a lot of work to do.
Brilliant. That seems like a pretty fair summation there as well. And I think being an activist, it could probably you could get soured, right, from seeing all the negative, like you say, politicians going from prohibition to sitting on boards and whatnot. But it's good to see that you've got that like positive outlook to where things are going to be. British Columbia has a pretty strong reputation for putting out some pretty high quality cannabis. To what extent have you seen this kind of current black market? Have the government been working with these guys at all? Do you know if there's communication there, or have they just kind of gone and done their own thing?
Well, I mean, there's different levels to the black market, and although I know some of these people personally, it's certainly much bigger than what I know, right? I think that a proper legalization would try to absorb the black market, put some oversight, put some taxes, make some bit of paperwork, but in an easy way. Permits and licenses should be $50, not $100, so expensive, or they're not that, the permits themselves aren't necessarily that expensive, but the process of getting one, the security, you have to build your whole structure and then go to Health Canada and ask for permission. You can't just show them your plans and then they approve it and you move forward. You got to build the whole thing before they even look at it, and it can take a long time for them to give you an approval. So unless you've got deep pockets and a lot of patience, it's very difficult to grow large quantities of legal cannabis. And there's a lot of smaller growers. There's these micro growery licenses that they created. Great idea, sort of. It's smaller producers. Thing is, those micro growers can't sell directly to consumers or even to the provinces. They've got to sell to the larger company, which then sells to the province, which then sells to the consumer. So there's a lot of people adding in their little bits there. We need like direct to consumer sales to keep the price down, right? But everybody wants to get their money out of it. So they've given out only a tiny number of these micro growery licenses. There should be hundreds of them out there, and I think there's less than a handful that have been given out. So that's a big problem. And on the other level in Vancouver, we had over 100 cannabis dispensaries operating in this city with very little problems. Now there's, I think, less than a dozen or so. And part of that's because of legalization. Part of it's just because the city's own legal battles with us came to a conclusion where we would have been in contempt of court if we'd stayed open, so a bunch of shut down. But it's the city's bylaws, and Vancouver is supposed to be a cannabis-friendly city, but the bylaws they put in are extremely restrictive, limit the number of outlets very much, and so make it difficult to operate, and are treating us much more strictly than alcohol is. And so there's a lot of problems that still need to be overcome. And medical users in Canada, I'd say, are having a harder time getting cannabis now than before legalization, because doctors who are always reluctant to sign the paperwork are even more so now. They say, just go buy it at the legal shop. What do you need me for? And you go to the legal shop and you say, well, I want to talk about my problems. Oh, I can't discuss your medical use with you against the rules. And if you want to access medical cannabis, your doctor has to sign. Then you got to sign with a licensed producer, order from them online, and they ship it to you by mail. And there's usually a shipping cost involved. And the government has all the same taxes on that medical cannabis as the other recreational, quote-unquote, cannabis. So you've got to pay more, wait longer, and go through more paperwork to get medical if you're a medical user than if you're someone who just wants to smoke for fun or whatever. And that just seems backwards, right? As a system, it should be at least be matched up like that. So, and with so many dispensaries closing or being raided post-legalization, if you were a medical user relying on dispensaries to get your products, you're more than likely lost your local dispensary, right? So there's all kinds of issues there.
And before we move on from cannabis, I just want to touch on, you mentioned, was it in the 90s, you said that the government was censoring information. So
that's right.
So what, like ban on books, movies, and what would be the penalties if you?
It was a law called Section 462.2 of the Criminal Code, and we used to talk about Section 462.2 all the time, right? And it was passed in the late 80s by the Conservative government in Canada, and it prohibited any literature or information for illicit drug use, was how it was defined. Literature included videos and music or any kind of media, not just written stuff, which advocated for drug use, explained how to make drugs, including how to grow cannabis, but it was or like showed it in a positive way or something like that. But it was very restrictive, and so High Times magazines would get stopped coming over the border. They were forbidden. When the law passed, it also prohibited paraphernalia as well. So bongs and pipes were also banned. And so they raided hundreds of head shops across Canada in the late 80s and really shut down the movement. And when I was trying to get a pipe in the early 90s, you had to go to a certain shop and they'd have something under the counter and it wouldn't really be very good, and it was all really hush-hush, and then that really changed. And Mark Emery really was a big influence. He opened a head shop just, it was actually across the street from Cannabis Culture here, where it's downstairs now. Where we are on Hastings, and this is a very historic block, right? The pot block here for the cannabis movement in Vancouver, and started selling literature and bongs. And that time, a lot of bongs were just like a plastic tube with a couple of holes drilled in and a rubber stopper, and it was a big business. And stores were just like over the last 10 years, a lot of stores were getting raided for selling cannabis. In the 90s, it was stores getting raided for selling bongs and pipes, and there were stores opening up across the country, and there'd be raids, and police would throw all their glass bongs in the back of the police truck and smash them all, and people would go to jail for the weekend. But the judges weren't willing to put Canadians in jail for long periods of time for selling bongs. So the only real cost was a financial cost and maybe a little bit of your liberty and the hassle of going to court. But at the end, most charges would get dropped or you'd get a fine or something. And so people who believed in this movement, and you could make a business out of it. And if you were smart about avoiding, being aware of potential police raids, you put money aside. So that was the paraphernalia movement. And then we defeated those censorship laws in court in the mid-90s or late 90s. There was some court battles and that, but it's still... Within a year of legalization, there was cities still raiding and blocking head shops opening in their communities as early, late as 2017, 2016. So this was still happening.
Just head shops.
Yeah, cities would pass laws against bongs and pipes being sold, usually some small town somewhere in Canada, but there would be raids or threats or refusals of permits and things. That was still happening up to quite recently, and that's another positive effect of legalization, is that at least bong shops don't get harassed so much. Although they still kind of do sometimes, because they call them. There's still problems with that even under legalization, with being able to properly sell bongs and pipes.
That's crazy. So I never associated Canada with censorship. So that's interesting.
It's one of the harshest, at the time it was one of the harshest censorship laws in the world. You could, in the Western world, you can get 6 months in jail, and I think it was a couple of $100,000 in fines. It was quite harsh.
Okay, so that was a fascinating insight into cannabis. But what I'm really interested in is, and I was laughing, man. I was looking you up, and I saw, okay, this guy's a heavy cannabis activist. Okay, well, Canada's legalized cannabis last year. Okay, it may not be perfect. What does Dana do? He's opened up a mushroom dispensary.
Yeah.
On to the next one, right?
Yeah, for me, it's always been more than cannabis. Cannabis had to be the first step, I think, in a lot of ways, but it's always been more than that for me. In fact, when I first started doing activism and stuff, when I was in university, one of my projects was a community newsletter called The Hype. And it was for injection drug users, and my friend and I would put it together on campus and print a bunch of copies and hand them out or give them at the needle exchange in Vancouver, long before any supervised injection sites or anything like that. And it was reaching out to that community. I'm not an injection drug user, but I think that the war on drugs is so much more than just marijuana, right? And I really think of it as a war on plants, because at its root, we're talking about coca leaves, we're talking about opium poppies, we're talking about psilocybin mushrooms and peyote cactus and cannabis flowers and ephedra plants, and it's through prohibition that makes everything stronger and deforms them and makes them used in unhealthy ways and eliminates any cultural context around their use, so that people are taught to use things in a responsible way. You don't really need laws, you need sort of social norms, right? Is what people typically respond to. So to me, opening a microdose mushroom dispensary was a logical step, and the next step forward for our movement. And the same tactics that we used and that we're still using to liberate cannabis and provide access is through these dispensaries and through the medical model. I think everyone should have access to cannabis, everyone should have access to mushrooms, but if you got a medical need, you should be at the front of the line for that access. And if we can provide to people with a medical need, and if that gives us a legal defense and an ability to get things started and rehabilitate these plants and help people access, then it seems like a win-win-win kind of situation, right? So a few months ago, I told the media I was launching a mushroom dispensary. So we only do microdoses. A microdose is around 5 to 10, maybe 15% of like a macro dose. So normally with mushrooms, you might take 1,000 milligrams, 1 gram, up to 3 grams maybe, or more, but that's kind of the usual typical range for like a psychedelic spiritual experience, however you want to describe it. And so we have capsules that are from 12.5 milligrams up to 100 milligrams of powdered psilocybin mushrooms. So 100 milligrams is 1/10 of a gram, right? So that's when you take a dose at that level and you just do it twice a week or once every 3 days or so, you're not getting any kind of psychedelic effect. You're just getting a little tingle, maybe even just a little less than a little tingle, like a sub-threshold dose, where it's often described as you just have a really good day. And it's really wonderful for many people who suffer from intense anxiety, depression, PTSD, which are quite common, and a lot of the issues people would often take antidepressants or SSRIs for. And it really helps people, and macrodoses are good too, nothing against larger doses. In fact, I'd like to create a safe space. People can come and do larger therapeutic doses with us in that kind of therapeutic safe context. But I don't want to start mailing out those to people. There are issues around, I'm sure 99.9% people would be fine if I sent them bigger doses, but just need one person to do something irresponsible or have a bad reaction, and it would be a big problem, right? And so I think, in a way, it's not a perfect comparison, but I feel like microdoses are sort of the CBD of mushrooms, and that CBD is the cannabinoid that doesn't really get you high but has a lot of medical benefit. That's not totally accurate, but it's a reasonable interpretation. And microdoses also, you get the medicinal benefit without getting the high. And so I started it in July. It's online only. It's mushroomdispensary.com. Can't believe that website wasn't taken yet. And then I told the local media I was going to be doing this, and I planned on opening a storefront in a few months. And one of the city councilors here, Melissa DeGenova, somebody I spar with on Twitter sometimes, and she's not a big fan of me or of the cannabis movement, and we argue a lot about our big 420 celebration in Vancouver, and she's pretty hostile to that, right? But I said I was going to open a storefront, and she tried to put a motion through at City Hall basically to stop me from opening a mushroom dispensary, and it referenced to the idea that people could inject psilocybin, which you can, but nobody's doing that. It's not really about, you can inject a lot of things, but nobody's injecting mushrooms for that purpose, right? You eat them. And that it mentions Mexican drug cartels and Middle Eastern gangs and money laundering and all these things that aren't really relevant to the question of whether or not Vancouver could benefit or be harmed by a storefront mushroom dispensary, right? So I was a bit worried about this, but actually the community rallied around me and around mushrooms quite a bit. A lot of speakers showed up, a lot of really passionate people, and some pretty high-profile people in the community came out and spoke for it. And the city council as a whole voted against that motion and really repudiated a lot of the fears that she was bringing forward. And I think they also learned a lot about microdosing from those who came. So I haven't opened that storefront yet, but I feel a lot more comfortable bringing it forward when the time is right, knowing that the majority of city council is not going to be calling for my head and demanding the police come in or whatever. And it is illegal, but under the Canadian scheduling of drugs, cannabis is in Schedule 2, mushrooms are in Schedule 3. So they're already considered less serious, and only microdoses means nobody's getting high, I'm set up that it's very difficult to get, like, to do a macrodose from the way I sell the products and the way I make them. I only provide limited quantities to people at a time. So, you know, the Vancouver police are pretty progressive when it comes to drugs and things like that. They're not perfect, but they're light years ahead of many other jurisdictions. I would be very surprised if they're going to try to come in and raid me. And from my experience in these kind of things, raids are ultimately great advertising if you can reopen again, because it just gets you a lot of media and people wanting, you know, I joke that I should thank Melissa DeGenova for complaining, because it got me hundreds of new members, because when it's in the news and there's controversy, you end up doing, you know, better business, right? So, but it's been really wonderful, and I realize I've been talking a long time without letting you ask any questions, but I can just go off like that. But
that's great to hear. No, you've been asking, like, answering all my questions. It's really great in a really structured way. That's awesome. I'm glad to hear it's had a positive reception. What's the feedback? I can understand if you can't share with me numbers. How many people are you currently helping?
Yeah, it's definitely busy. You know, some days we'll get up to 10 new members wanting to sign up, so it's quite busy. And you know, I have kind of a sliding price scale. I don't like turning anybody away if they can't afford it, so I make sure people are well aware that they can get discounts if they need. And some people want to pay extra. They're so happy and grateful that for the benefit. But the benefits people have been describing to me are really positive. And people share some quite intimate portions of their life and their problems and their experiences with me. And when they tell me how much it's been helping them, and how, you know, I'm not crying every day anymore, I'm able to sleep better, I feel in touch with my children again. You know, a lot of people taking SSRIs report a lot of emotional blunting and not able to connect or feel, you know, the antidepressants seem to act by damping down all your emotions, and so you don't feel those negative ones so strongly, but you don't also feel the positive ones either. And the mushrooms seem to act by bringing up all your other emotions, so that you still might feel that pain, but it's not overwhelming, because you also can feel joy, and you can integrate those negatives into yourself and accept them and then move past them. And so it's a different kind of a process. It seems like it's more of a healing and integrative process, but SSRIs are more of a blunting and a pushing away. And, you know, I'm not judging anybody. People take whatever they want, but I get a lot of people contacting me who are on SSRIs who want to get off and are able to dramatically reduce or eliminate their use by taking mushrooms. And it's still really going. So I started in July. It's only been a few months, right? And you just dose twice a week or so. So it takes a few months of use to find a couple of weeks to find the right dose level. I have everybody start on a low level, probably lower than they should be, and then work up slowly to get to where they want to be. But, you know, if you're dosing twice a week and it takes 6 doses to find your level, that takes a while, right? So, but yeah, it's been really fulfilling for me. And it's getting a little overwhelming, because I started off doing everything myself because I wanted to get a feel for things. I've got some sort of pre-written answers to common questions and things like that, and I'm able to suss out people and figure out what the common issues are and what the right dosage is and how to work it. But yeah, it's been really wonderful. And I hope that what happens with this, like what happened with Cannabis, where I opened Vancouver's 3rd dispensary. I wasn't the first guy to open a dispensary, but I taught dozens and dozens of people. My manager and I at our dispensary opened our doors to so many people and gave them huge talks on how to open this, how to mimic us. I hope that this spurs a psychedelic and entheogenic above coming into the light across Canada, and that people will hopefully see, well, Dana's been doing it for 4 months and nobody's busted him yet. Maybe if I open a microdose dispensary or something similar in my community, maybe I'll be fine here too. And, you know, some people might not be fine in their community because police and enforcement is different. But I don't think any judge in Canada is going to put anybody in jail for selling even macrodoses to people with a legitimate medical need. I think they would treat it very similarly to how cannabis was treated. And there's also court cases we've got launching right now that are very similar to the court cases we had in the early days of medical access in Canada in the early mid-90s. We had some pretty influential cases. I won't get into all the legal stuff, but we're using the same arguments, some cases the same lawyers even, and I think that we're going to see breakthroughs that way. So I hope that this begins a renaissance in access to mushrooms, and that it doesn't take 20 years. maybe we can make this happen sooner. And not just mushrooms really, but all the psychedelic and entheogenic medicines, both sort of the artificial ones like LSD and MDMA, and the more natural things like peyote or mescaline and psilocybin and that. And ultimately, we also need to do this with coca leaves. We need to do it with opium poppies. I think it needs to be, and I'm kind of working behind the scenes on those kinds of projects too, but those aren't really ready for fruition yet. But I think that if we can get people more back to the natural plant extracts and the less potent versions, things like, there's studies showing if you drink coca tea, it can help people who have problems with their cocaine use. Drinking coca tea can be a substitute for them, and drinking coca tea is fine. And if somebody was snorting caffeine and you were like, hey, why don't you just drink coffee instead of snorting or injecting caffeine, that would probably work. And we know that because you can buy powdered caffeine and inject it and snort it if you want to, and you would get super buzzed, but no one does that because they just drink strong coffee. And so, and with opium too, I think the worst thing was raiding and shutting down the opium dens and the opium parlors. I think that maybe smoking opium has some long-term, it's not great for your liver to smoke opium every day for decades, but who cares? That's a very minor issue compared to dying instantly from taking poison fentanyl-laced drugs and stuff. And so, we need to bring that back. I wish that we would reopen opium dens in Vancouver. I mean, we need legal access to heroin and other things, but for a lot of opiate users, I believe, and there's studies confirming this, that if you have access to the milder, safer form, people would prefer that. Generally speaking, people prefer, when it comes to drugs, the milder, safer version to the more hardcore ones. And it's only prohibition that pushes these things to make them more stronger and more dangerous, and often synthesized and made artificially from, not even from the exact same thing. That's all about smuggling and profit, not about what consumers really want with it. So that's part of the solution, and the mushroom thing, I think, is the first step in this much broader effort.
That was really exciting. I'm really glad to hear your approach is one of openness and encouraging other people to do this as well. Like, that it's clearly the activism. I guess I'd call you maybe a social entrepreneur or something along those lines.
Yeah, right? It's a challenge because, you want, as a business, I don't need this to make money. I need it to make money partly because that way people who can't afford it, I can subsidize them. Partly because I like to spend money on other activism projects, so you need to make a profit. But I don't think I'm going to monopolize the Canadian mushroom market or anything, and it's way bigger than I ever possibly could, and that's not my goal, and same with the Cannabis Dispensary. The more competitors we had, I saw our business kind of drop as others opened in the city, and a lot more were out there. But we're still plenty of people coming to our shops, and now we've only got one shop left, but we're actually quite busy because so many others in the city have been raided and shut down. A lot of our competitors aren't there anymore. But that's not how I want to get busier. I liked it better when there was 100 shops in the city, and maybe things were a little slower for me, but that's still what I want to see, And people talk about, are you going to try to transition to the legal system and stuff? And I'm like, I didn't start selling cannabis so that I could have a cannabis shop, right? That's not really my goal. And right now, the legal system is not adequate for my clients. That if we could get a permit tomorrow and transition into it, and we're supposed to be in the process of doing this, right? But I don't really want to, but we're sort of going along just to keep everybody happy while we see what happens, right? But I know we lose most of our clients. There's a reason they're coming to our shop and not to the legal ones out there. There's a bunch of reasons. And when the day comes when the legal system is good enough that I don't need my shops anymore, then I'm happy to stop doing it. If the day comes that people can get, psilocybin microdoses in a better, safer way for a lower price from someone who's more knowledgeable or better, but if it's better, whatever, then I'll go off and do something else, right? I wouldn't say I'm that I'm the only one to do it or that I'm even the best person, but I'm willing to do it and make it happen, and that I think is important. So I'll keep trying to be at the frontier. I feel a lot more comfortable in that kind of gray area and pushing things forward that way. I think having a legal cannabis shop for me would be very boring, and I'm not sure they want to give me one when I'm doing all this other civil disobedience stuff, right? So I think my role, and in some ways I look back in the last 30 years or so and I feel it's prepared me for this second phase, and that this is almost in a way the more important phase, or kind of bringing it all home. And that, in many ways, the opioid overdose crisis, which is really a prohibition crisis, right? And that is so much more important than the work we did with cannabis in some ways, because although cannabis prohibition affected more people in terms of how many arrests there were. The people aren't being killed, or at least rarely being killed. Sometimes they get shot by police or whatever, but the numbers are much smaller. And that, in a way, this broader war on drugs issue and opioid prohibition and that is more important. But it's all intertwined anyways. And I'm excited about the future and about these projects. I'm excited about getting my storefront open for mushroom microdoses and creating a safe space for macrodoses. I've had such wonderful feedback so far. I'm really looking forward to expanding this. And so hopefully this time next year, there's a dozen places across Canada where you can go and, like, there's places now already, but open places that have a name and advertise and are in the news or that are easy to find, that where you can go and take macrodoses and do experiences in a safe therapeutic setting, and that more places are selling microdoses in a responsible kind of way, but making them available. That would be wonderful, and I hope I can help there's a big pile of kindling there waiting, and hopefully this online dispensary that I started is the spark that might help make that blaze happen.
And I think now paradigms are starting to shift. There was the John Hopkins funding, was it $16-17 million there to research psilocybin and other psychedelics for a whole host of different ailments, which is pretty incredible. So it's a really exciting time. Yeah,
there's research happening in Canada too that's been starting, and also into MDMA and that kind of stuff. And a lot of it's similar to cannabis. How people, it's easy to demonize or mock it if it's just some hippies wanting to get stoned or whatever. But if it's a child with epilepsy or somebody who's using cannabis for cancer or serious ailments, it's hard to make a joke and mock that person. And with entheogens, the same thing. We're talking about returning soldiers with PTSD. We're talking about people who have survived some terrible traumas, who are trying to find peace with themselves, and so it changes the perception. Then you go, well, if it helps those people, maybe it also helps someone who isn't quite in such a terrible situation, but we've all got traumas of some kind. Some of them way more harsh, but we've all got healing we need. We've all got anxiety and stress and depression. Maybe it's kind of good for everybody, when they're used in the right way and in the right context. And I think that just changes the paradigm. And I think cannabis had its paradigm change, and people understand that, cannabis is fun, but even when you're having fun, it can also have medical benefits or have that. And so I think that's what's coming, and the research and the quick cases and this open dispensary and all these things, I think we're going to see transformative change happen.
I think that you're right, that the changing perception is key, and like CBD was like this Trojan horse where it didn't have that high, and suddenly you've got people that have lived through prohibition, the war on drugs, sort of feel like they can try it. They get benefit from it, and it just opens the floodgates. And I like how you compared that to microdosing as well, because it takes that scary element to it, and it can be scary, especially if you've never done it before. And
absolutely,
it's a powerful thing that people should respect. But actually, it's very, very safe when we compare it to a whole host of other stuff that we take for granted.
For a lot of my members, it's just they need someone to hold their hand and tell them, hey, it's going to be okay. You're not going to get arrested. You're not going to trip out. Here's the dose that you should take. A lot of them say, I can buy mushrooms online, or I know someone, but I want to talk to someone I can trust and get good guidance and know that when you say it's this, I can rely on you that this is what the dosage is are right and everything's accurate. And a lot of people are terrified of getting too high. And of course, the reality is that the high on mushrooms is actually a very positive experience that people who have gone through it almost universally say it was a very positive, loving, warm experience. So it's really not to be afraid of, even in larger dosages, right? As long as you're not having it come on you while you're skydiving or driving a car or whatever in some wrong situation. But otherwise, but just having that guidance and that is important for a lot of people. A lot of them are really scared about getting arrested. Oh, if you get busted, or when you get busted, am I gonna? And I'm like, well, I'm not going to get busted. And I keep your stuff safe, and it's all in a secure fashion. But even in a worst case scenario where I got busted and the police were able to access my customer records, I just remind them there's been hundreds of cannabis dispensary raids across Canada. And the police and authorities have never once, they rarely even charge the people that they arrest selling the cannabis. virtually most times they don't even arrest. They don't even charge those people. If they do, they normally plea bargain them out. But never once has any customer ever. They've never gone after anybody. And I just can't see the police. This guy ordered 0.8 grams of mushrooms to treat his severe migraines. Let's get him, boys, right? Like, no, nobody's going to do that, and no judge is ever going to want to see that in court. And so it's all, but people are understandably very nervous. And I live in a small town. I'm a teacher. If anybody knows, I'm taking this. And it's unfortunate that you can be taking, some quite harmful pharmaceuticals, and you don't get judged for that, nor should you be, but taking a very small quantity of a plant medicine that's, very safe and widespread use, and they're so afraid this could ruin their career, they'll be judged, and you can't be around children if you're taking mushrooms, you're a drug addict, blah blah blah. And it's just it's really sad, but it's nice to help people make those changes. And I think microdosing is really going to be an opener for a lot of people that would just never try that macrodose experience, but they'll microdose and they will tell their friends, hey, I'm getting those. A lot of them say, my friends tell me how much it's helping me, and some of them are interested in trying it now because they see how much my life has improved, and so word of mouth is a big thing.
And then I think just finally, correct me if I'm wrong, I think I read somewhere about, is it legal for certain religions or for spiritual purposes? I think for ayahuasca, so a relative, you could say, in the psychedelic family. Is that an avenue that you've ever kind of thought about going down from an activism point of view?
Yeah, I mean, there's not really a huge religious tradition around psilocybin mushrooms, and an organized one in the same way. I mean, it's definitely a spiritual experience, and the definition of what is like a valid religion or church is very vague, right? A good friend of mine named Chris Bennett, who's written several books about cannabis in religion and in earlier cultures, and he did a court challenge on religious access before legalization, and he did some progress in court, but ended up getting sent back to the lower court, and it was very expensive for him, and then it got legalized, and he wasn't sure if his arguments would still hold. But the ayahuasca church has a very organized, or the Santo Daime church is what it's called. There's actually two of them. There's Santo Daime, which has got quite a following in Brazil. They've got their own communities, and it's definitely an organized religion, however you want to define that, right? And that it's got adherence, it's got liturgy, it's got a certain amount of dogma and a structure to it, right? And there's also one, I think, called the Union Vegetal. I think that's the name, and that's another kind of organized church. But yeah, you're right, they did get access. I think also, that the courts, or the Health Canada, I guess, is more likely to grant those guys because no one's taking ayahuasca recreationally, and it's not really fun. Like I've done the Santo Daime ceremonies a few times, and it's revelatory and very healing and positive, but you almost always throw up, which already is a pretty big no for a lot of people, and it's pretty intense in the way they use it. I guess you could take smaller doses, but it doesn't taste very good. And mushrooms, I think you'd have an uphill battle on mushrooms because they're more associated with recreational use, even though to me these are very much overlapping areas, right? But yeah, because I don't have, to me in a way, these plant medicines are my religion in terms of I've devoted my life to it. I spend my fortune, my time, my energy, my focus on making these things happen. So to me, it's obviously a deeply held, personal, spiritual, but I'm not part of an organized religion in that sense, right? So I would help somebody else if there was a group that had an organized structure and that wanted to go to court and argue those things. I'd be happy to help out in some way, but for me, I don't think I'm the right person to lead that battle just because I don't belong to an organized religion. We thought about starting our own kind of thing, but they don't usually like it if you start your own church, in terms of illegal. Maybe just having that as a structure for our own selves, but usually in court, if it's your own thing that you started, every religion was started by somebody somewhere, right? But they don't usually, that usually is harder to convince them it's sincere when it's, I made this up a couple of weeks ago, and here's the thing I wrote, right? But there was a group called Church of the Universe in Canada, and it was a cannabis religion organization founded by these two guys in Ontario, and they had a pretty big following, and they've kind of got a thing. They did a lot of court battles and struggling to get recognized as a church and providing cannabis as a sacrament and this kind of stuff, but they made some progress in the courts, but they never got that ultimate victory of liberating things. And said I would help somebody else in that, but I don't think I'm the right guy to lead that charge.
Dana, thank you for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Right on. Thank you very much.